So thanks again for having me here this week. Last week was an awesome opportunity to, share some insights on what's happening within the SME space and how businesses are needing to navigate around the challenges that they're currently experiencing. And also it was clearly highlighted last week, I think, from the discussion. And thanks for your input, Colin. But it was a good indication that it doesn't matter what size business you're operating, the challenges are still the same. It also doesn't matter where in the world you're operating, we're all kind of experiencing the same thing. And I think today, while I'm grateful for the opportunity to sit here and talk about our view of applied intelligence, I think it's also important to highlight that even within the medium-sized enterprise, businesses are all going through the same growth trajectory. And we're all kind of experiencing the same things, right? We see it with the businesses that we're supporting. And, I think it would be good today to get some feedback and input from the group that's here, to get a sense of what they're experiencing with the businesses that they're running, the businesses that they're a part of, or even the businesses that they're supporting as consultants. So I don't know if there's anybody in the audience that is a consultant or that runs a medium-sized enterprise. I see Michael is here today again. Michael, how do you feel about sharing some insights with us?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Did you say you want me to do 5 minutes? No more.
So I'll give you 5 minutes. But if you can share with us, right, you're in the leadership space.
Yeah.
Correct? So what are you seeing within the environment that you're operating in? What are businesses experiencing? What are some of the challenges? And I think, in terms of the environment that we're operating in now, considering the great return to work and considering the great resignation, it's something that's very valid for what businesses are going to be experiencing. Also considering that, we're talking about applied intelligence. How are you experiencing businesses?
Okay, good question. I've made some notes. Here we go. I think the first challenge that people are going through with a hybrid model is, there's a nice phrase I learned about change, which is technology changes quickest, then followed by individuals, then followed by organizations. So, tech changes straight away every day, as you know, it's always updating. And then we can change our mindsets pretty quick. But to try and change an organization takes time, but all this is happening in real time. So that's the first thing. There's what I call a hurry up and wait culture at the moment. Some things happen very quick, and then we've got to wait around. It's like hurry up and wait. And so people get frustration. I think there's some very high customer expectations we've got to deal with. That's the first one. For example, in real estate, I've definitely noticed that. I think the second thing is in relation to leadership, there's a great need for emotional intelligence, for people to understand the pulse of their business, the culture of their business, and particularly to be self-aware, to be empathetic, and be able to motivate their people. Engagement, people don't resign from something they're engaged with. The third thing is our own blind spots, our own biases, and our own, it's called judgment noise. We all make mistakes and we all can't see everything. It's very easy for us to just kind of like do things. We're just going to do something. We're just going to do this change. I think we all need clearance committees. We need people who we can bounce ideas off and say, what do you think about this? Is this right? That like we're doing today. I want to give you an example of some good practice from a client of mine. They're in the insurance sector. So this is how they've adapted. They had an office that was open 5 days a week. They closed. They've only just recently reopened. They only opened for 2 days a week. All of the clients that used to come in and fill in forms or do it over the phone, they don't do that anymore. They changed the whole model. So all the clients, they fill in the form online, takes the clients 5 minutes rather than 30 minutes over the phone. Anything that the client then wants to ring about is what they call a value-added conversation, meaning it's something that they can't get through automation. Therefore, they value it more. The person working in the organization is giving them more value. It's a win-win. And that's massively a really good example of how they've done that. Really, really good. Another example is a global chamber member called Russell Bedford International. So they're a networking firm for accountants. their big thing was face-to-face meetings all around the world, right, for their clients. Couldn't do that for 2 years. They took it online, and they provided lots of CPD. They created an intranet with lots of resources. They provided online training. Their thing is to take you further. And what I'd say is, as long as you're being true to your values, in this case, they're thinking, is it taking the members further? They'll do well. The last thing I wanted to do is give you 2 recommendations if you like to read or like to listen to books that can help with this. One's called Noise, A Flaw in Human Judgment. Daniel Kahneman, I can't pronounce his name, he created Thinking Fast and Slow. It's excellent. It's really helped me to understand where a lot of my blind spots are. And the second one is called The Future is Faster Than You Think, by Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler. And it's brilliant. It came out a few years ago, but it's saying the next 10 years are going to see more technological disruptions and changes than the last 100 years. And it helped me to ride out from thinking, that's terrifying, to, okay, I'm on board with that, to, I'm actually quite excited. And they give examples in insurance, fintech, all the different agriculture, import, export. So no matter what area you're looking in, I just think it's really important that we go to good people like we're doing today, incredible sources, rather than just kind of doing stuff. So the speed of change, leadership in terms of emotional intelligence and our own blind spots, an example from insurance of good practice, how they've changed, and hopefully something that you can follow on yourself. And that's 4 minutes. So hopefully I saved you a minute. There you go.
Great, thank you.
Right, you're welcome.
So if I heard you correctly, you were talking about the importance of competence. You were talking about the importance of having the skill set and the know-how within your organization, regardless of where you're operating, regardless of which function you're operating in. As an organization, it's essential to have standardized management and leadership practices and principles that needs to be followed through in an organization. You're also talking about the adaptation to the environment that we're currently operating in. So considering how technology and applied intelligence can be used within the organization to keep the entire organization functioning optimally, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's one thing I just wanted to add that you just reminded me. Last week when you spoke about the self-service style of the global economy, I really took that to heart. And I had to think about it, and I realized for what I do and what a lot of people want is, we want to help people to help themselves. Like you've just said there, whether that's leadership, whether that's technology, we need to give them the stuff that then they can take it and run with it. We're not making them dependent on us. We're helping them to help themselves. And however you go about doing that, you're absolutely right. I just want to say that because it really impressed me. It really resonated with me. And I went away and thought about it.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
There's something else that you mentioned that prompted a thought for me, right? So when we think about any organization, we think about there's a vision and there's a mission and there's a strategy that the entire organization is gearing towards. Now we take that for granted, but it's not always the case, right? You have instances where people are doing their jobs, but they don't necessarily understand how their job is contributing to the greater organization. You have in your mind as management or leadership or as owner, where you want your organization to go, but it's not necessarily clearly articulated so that everybody in your organization knows what the intent of the business operation is, right? We all know that, okay, fine, I'm working towards making a profit, but we don't necessarily know what else the business is aiming towards. And there's also something else that's quite critical in that, and that's collaboration. So we're talking about building skill sets, we're talking about competency, we're talking about collaboration, especially within the environment that we're operating in. But most critical, even in the world pre-COVID, where it was not that urgent to work in a remote environment, it was absolutely essential to have an organization functioning as a collaborative unit, as opposed to a siloed effect where functions are operating based on their own mindset and their own perspective, right? Because that's just a recipe for disaster. So I do think that, you've made some very, very valuable points. And I think within the consulting space and within the management consulting space where we operate, those are challenges that we're seeing on a daily basis. Those are not new challenges. They are part of every business's growth trajectory. And in order for a business to function optimally, to make a profit, to grow, to sustain, to improve, there needs to be cogs in a business that are all operating in unison. And from my perspective, underpinning all of that is a good solid foundation of making sure that your people know what they need to do, they understand what their roles entail, and they understand how they're all working together. And that's where good leadership comes in for me. Just a question, is there somebody else in the group that would like to share, just the experiences on, what they're seeing in the environment, what they're seeing within the small business space or as a consultant? I think it would be valuable to get your input. No? Nobody else feel like sharing today? Okay. Thank you though, Michael, for your insights. I mean, it's really great to see how it doesn't matter where in the world you're operating, and it doesn't matter which sector you're operating in, you're seeing that businesses are all experiencing the same thing. I'd like to throw the question out to you, Colin, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Just some input from your end, because I mean, you've got such a vast experience, as a consultant, an entrepreneur, running your own organizations, going into organizations and helping them turn around. I mean, what are some of the things you see?
Yeah, well, I would really like to underscore both the points that Michael made and you made. I really like that Michael brought up the point about blind spots. I talked last week, some of you may have been in our meeting last week, about, that the three kinds of knowledge: things you know, things you don't know, and the things you don't know, you don't know. And I think as we get more experience, part of the process of becoming more experienced is realizing how big that space of you don't know what you don't know is. It's a very big space. And that's where a lot of the challenges for business success lie, is in that space, what Michael, I think, termed blind spots. And so I'd like to combine that with what you said, which is, organizations, they have their mission, they have their vision, that's their overarching, view of where they're going, what they're trying to accomplish. That's all fine and good, but we all know that for execution, the devil's in the details. It's what gets done every day, day in, day out. We used to have a program in my previous company that was based in Arizona. We called it Do It Daily, and we tried to align the actual execution of the strategy into things that could be measured on a day-to-day basis, because if you don't do that, people go astray. The challenge is that it's one thing to do that when you have a team of people working in the same office, and even then it's difficult, by the way. And and historically, there haven't been very good tools to manage that. Some combination of spreadsheets and whatever, but you tend to hold it together, let's say it that way. You tend to hold it together because you have frequent interaction and in-person interaction by people to align that day-to-day effort, those day-to-day efforts. So now that we're in this hybrid mode, where either we have distributed workforce, even globally distributed workforce, but now it's even that the office only gets together once or twice a week in person, if that, and that's only re-emerging now. We haven't seen each other at all. I think that is an area that I think is a common challenge to companies, whether they're here in the Philippines where I am, or in North America or anywhere around the world. I think that's the thing. And what happens is if you don't align well on those day-to-day execution decisions, then what Michael said comes into play. Everyone starts operating far too much in their blind spots. And you get disunity and lack of coordination. So I don't know if anybody if that resonates with anyone out there, but I think that's what that's kind of the shifting role, I think, of management now, to elevate the importance of that type of coordination, whereas before, I mean, it's always been important, but it's more challenging now than it used to be. So that's my thoughts, Yushini.
So I want to share something with you. So in my previous life, in my corporate role, I was lucky enough to work for an organization that literally had every single process mapped out. There was no stone unturned. If something didn't work, then I was lucky enough to be a part of the team that literally built new processes, that managed strategy, managed the implementation of strategy. And hearing what you're saying, you took for granted the fact that you have team meetings, you have an agenda for a team meeting with a clearly defined output for every meeting. You are face-to-face, so you have boards up, managing your KPIs and showing everybody what is required of them from a day-to-day perspective. But now in a hybrid world where you don't necessarily see everybody every day, you're also losing the dynamic of team building and building relationships. And I hear some horror stories from some of the businesses that we're exposed to about what they're actually managing from a KPI perspective. And I think sometimes that gets distorted, right? It should not be you managing time away from your desk, or how long your status on your internal messenger is saying away. It's time spent at desk versus output. And I think one of the challenges that we're exposed to from the end that we're sitting at is that if you are unable to clearly define what your outputs are for your team and for your people, and you have KPIs that are tracked on a regular basis, it results in missed opportunity. And I say that because there's so many impacts on not delivering on what the strategy is asking for, not to mention the financial impact and the financial implication of having resources that are not delivering what they're supposed to be delivering, right? And we've been lucky enough to, put some thought into what I'm going to chat to you about today, which is what we call our applied intelligence. So our applied intelligence is a software that has been built on and incorporates MBA content in digestible format, years, I'm talking decades of consulting experience, corporate experience, entrepreneurial experience, and just a good understanding of what makes a business tick. It's been built into a platform that allows people or the user to understand what is expected of them from a competency perspective, how to build those competencies within their people, how to manage the day-to-day operations of their business, have a full understanding and full view of the daily performance of your business, as well as the ability to self-diagnose where immediate attention would be needed by function, as well as in the total operational function of the business. And on top of that, strategic planning to tactical implementation. And this is what Edvysor offers. Now, the reason why we believe it's important, we've seen the journey of some of the businesses that have joined us on the Edvysor journey. And we've seen what's been happening. And I'll give you one or two very good examples of how things have actually turned around, with key examples of where the business has actually been failing, right? So there was one business who agreed to let me share the information. It's a services business, but within the services business, they need raw materials to provide their service. Now, the business is predominantly manually operated. So there's not very many trend analysis reports, or not much from a view of where they're spending their money, how they're spending their money, and more specifically, how their resources are using their products to provide the service, right? So what that resulted in is a big understanding of, or misunderstanding of, where people are not productive. Do you have the right people in place? Do you understand how your functions should be operating? Do your people understand what you're trying to do and how you are trying to grow your business? Do they have an indication of how their role contributes to the overall goal of your business? Do they know how much of wastage comes from their just operating on a day-to-day basis? Do they understand, most importantly, that you have managers in place, but your managers are not operating at the right level that they should be operating at, because they're managing 3 levels lower, and they are putting out fires on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to thinking about how they could be growing their business and giving the junior management or the middle management in the business the opportunity to actually manage the output of their people. So it completely disrupted the entire organization. There was a lot of financial wastage. There was a lot that needed to be put in place from a process perspective, from just your stock ordering, making sure that you can actually go and source new business, because then you can forecast and you know how to manage your resources against what you're trying to achieve. And this is where Edvysor came in, right? And I don't want to go into too much detail. I'd like Colin to just, talk about his experience with Edvysor, and then I'll take you through the journey of Edvysor after.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to just emphasize a couple points you made and how I think Edvysor addresses them. You also mentioned the idea of day-to-day visibility and management and coordination. But the other thing you mentioned was self-diagnosing and correcting. And I think that's really critical, because when you make a strategy, it's sort of an educated guess of how you think you should proceed. And we all know, any of us have been around for a while, that you're not going to be correct. It's not going to be exactly the right path to success. So if you just all meet at the beginning of the year or beginning of each calendar quarter or something like that, or even monthly, and say, okay, let's brainstorm on our strategies and set forth some strategic goals and tasks, and then have no course correction until the next time you get together, you're going to, as you said, you're going to have a lot of wastage. Things are not going to go well. So I think it's very important that you need to be able to diagnose whether or not things are working. And that means you have to have access to timely information of what is working and what's not working, or how are you tracking towards the plans, and how is each individual tracking towards the plans. So for me, there's a lot of capability in Edvysor, as Yushini mentioned, in terms of a phenomenal knowledge base, built from years of experience of consulting and corporate management, and there's training modules and a lot of knowledge transfer that can take place. But to me, where the platform really pays the biggest dividends is that when you have your strategic planning sessions, then you can take that strategy and enter it into Edvysor, so that, first of all, everyone is aligned, everybody understands what the goals are, and not just the high level ones. You take this strategy and then you can move it down, to even tactical level, to say, okay, here's how each department or each individual or each function within the organization, this is their piece of this is their piece of their responsibility that collectively then results in, you know, that strategic outcome. So let's break this into those pieces, and then on a day-to-day basis, let's track how we're advancing, and then we can immediately see ourselves if we're accomplishing what we need to do. But also importantly, the management, people with the management responsibility can see that same thing in a near real-time basis. And that, I think that's the real key. And that really plugs this hole for hybrid, because I think we didn't realize when we were in face-to-face how much of the check and balance and realignment and diagnostic and course correction happened informally in the hallways or, you know, in the impromptu meetings. Like, oh, hey, you know, Joe, hey, Susan, or whatever, let's get together and chat about this, because I think, you know, we need to make an adjustment. And then it wasn't a planned meeting on the calendar. You know, now when these things happen, it's kind of like, gosh, I don't really have ready access to that person, or I'm available, but they're not available. I don't know how to reach them or whatever. Well, I'll just save it for next week's, you know, weekly operations meeting or something like that. Well, it's too late. That's where the wastage comes in, right? So, so I've really appreciated how the Edvysor platform, you know, as I said, allows you to create the strategy into all of the operational pieces, and then allows for that coordination and that ability to diagnose rapidly what needs to be adjusted. And I think that's the key. That's the key, right? Because if we just blindly follow, oh, I'm just a little robot here, and I'm just checking off the boxes of what we all said a month ago we were going to do, whether or not that's effective. And unfortunately, that happens in a lot of organizations, right? So I think if you're trying to do this just with meetings and Excel spreadsheets and things like that, it's an inadequate tool, right? So we're in this digital modern era now, digital transformation. And if you don't have the tools at your fingertips to adjust to the reality of how business works today, then you know, you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage. So I hope that, you know, without drilling down into the details of the platform, I think, to me, that's where the real value comes from my use of Edvysor.
I see Julie's on the call, and Julie, I'm sorry to just throw this out at you, but I'd like to just get your take on how much, from what you're seeing, you know, the stress contributors is related to business functioning and business operations. Julie?
Hi, everyone.
Apologies
Hello.
for just putting you on the spot.
No, it's okay. It's all right. I do apologize that I'm on mute in my calendar. I'm trying to cook a meal whilst listening, because I've got another appointment later, and I didn't want to miss you, so that's why I've been on mute. Yeah, just repeat that question, please, Yushini, if that's okay.
So I was asking about, you know, the space that you're in and the environment that you're working in. How much of what you're seeing is related to how businesses are actually functioning and the operational performance of a business? You know,
I think it's massive at the moment, because you know, my mind's been working at 1,000,000 miles an hour when I'm listening to you and Michael speak, and it's everything that kind of I've experienced and I'm now experiencing with clients. I love, you know, the sound of your platform. It just ticks all the boxes that people need, and yes, that's what we're seeing. That's where, because of the products we use, that's where we're seeing stresses are coming from with people, because the organizational strategies predominantly, and that's not always the case, but I would say in 90% of the cases, it's the organizational structure and clarity around everything they need that's just not available to them. People are floundering, and they're floundering even more in the hybrid working space because, like you say, they've not got those water cooler or corridor moments to kind of discuss course correction or what their expectations are. And it's not a conversation where you'd log in a Teams or a Zoom call. It's if people are floundering, they tend to struggle along rather than speak to people like they would do in the office. And so yes, that's what we're finding that we're kind of working with, and these are the things that make a massive difference to people. And people think of stress as just workplace stress and, well, it's part of the job, but it's actually not. It's eliminated if a lot of these things are actually strategized and put in place for them.
And I think a lot has to do with, it starts from the onset, right? Making sure that there's somebody to onboard you correctly into the business, somebody to hold your hand, just to show you the ropes, somebody to make sure that you have what you need to just have the basic skills to do the job that you're hired to do, right?
Yes.
So training is extremely important, making sure that, but not just from an individual perspective, but also from an organizational perspective, ensuring that there's consistency in the organization, not just in terms of function, but also if you're a business that operates across multiple locations, making sure that the business is operating functionally sound. You have a blueprint that you're working against.
Yeah, and my business colleague Jackie, who's not here, would say that after the last couple of years, many leaders are still in survival mode. They're floundering, and they're acting very much in a knee-jerk response to things, and because of that, their business is struggling because, like you say, they've not got all these organizational things in place, and they're just reacting to all the things that are happening to them. Not everybody, obviously, but a lot of businesses you're seeing that, and that's why they're really struggling.
Something else that's been interesting as a result of the pandemic. So it's quite publicized from the World Bank, the failure rates of small businesses. But what we've also seen is that there's been a mass exodus of employment into self-employment. And the self-employment has given rise to a number of new businesses. But within that, there's also a high number of consultants that have hit the market, right? Because it's people who believe that they have a skill to add, they can add value instead of not working through the treacherous, perceived times that we are operating in. I would rather work for myself, and I would rather be an entrepreneur. And the cycle sort of starts all over again. But I think what we're seeing, regardless of whether you are a small business or a solopreneur or even a medium-sized organization, it becomes critical to stay agile and to stay ahead of what can possibly impact your business. You also need to be flexible in terms of the way the organization is operating within the environment. So we know that there's, for instance, a looming fifth wave. If you hadn't learned from the first two waves what could possibly impact your business or how your business needs to adjust, then, unfortunately, you've not been very clear on what your need is and how you are servicing your need for the customer, because ultimately you are there to fill a need as a business, and that's what will keep you profitable. We also spoke at length last week around how the consumer needs have been changing. And that is an important factor to consider, right? But within that, the reason why I'm mentioning all of this is because I'd like to give you some idea of what Edvysor actually is. So Edvysor, if you were here last week and you heard a little bit about what we do with BET, Edvysor was built off BET, but for a different market. We realized that the medium-sized business experiences, while similar challenges to the smaller business, has a bigger need for process, for making sure that they have a blueprint, for making sure that they are mitigating the functional risks, for making sure that there's a collaborative functioning unit as opposed to siloed mentality, right? Because you are assuming that the larger the business, the more resources, and within that, even though you have more people, you also have more opportunity to make fundamental mistakes. But it doesn't matter what size business you're operating, there are key fundamental processes and practices that need to be in place for the business to be sustainable. So what Edvysor does is, through the use of our applied intelligence, we've built in, like I mentioned earlier on, the experience, the knowledge, the theory. We've built it in such a way that when the business, functional head, business owner, or senior executive diagnoses each function of their business, it spits out an action plan for the business. So based on the way you're assessing your business and the way your business function is running, it gives you an indication of where your immediate attention should go. Once you have that idea of where the immediate attention should be placed in order for that function to operate effectively, you are then able to prioritize those functional gaps as a key item to be managed and monitored, and functional priorities to be implemented within your organization. And what this does is it gives everybody in the organization, so it creates transparency. It gives everybody in the organization an indication of what's going on, where opportunities lie, and where possible bottlenecks actually exist within the organization, right? It also assigns accountability and responsibility in the organization. So it's not something that's just spoken about, it's something that is driven to improve functional performance in the organization. Once that's done, and once you have the competencies and the skill and the know-how of how to run the function, you then move on to the actual implementation of the strategy of the organization. The strategic planning to tactical implementation allows a business to set from your strategic level a goal or a strategy that is made clear to everybody in the organization as well, and can be tracked and monitored right down to employee level. Not just that, it also gives you the opportunity to assign and clearly view how budget and financial performance in the organization is managed and monitored. So you see what's expected of you in the organization, you see why you are doing what you are doing, and you see how that contributes to the overall operational performance. We have seen, and it's been theorized, that 4% of senior management in organizations don't actually know what's happening at lower levels in the organization. Now, it's a scary statistic if you think about where all that stress is coming from, where, the knee-jerk reactions are coming from, Julie, where, Michael, you talking about leadership and the importance of leadership and why, it's so crucial in managing and, in the remote environment, especially. We then also allow for a clear daily, weekly, and monthly view of what's happening in the organization. So scorecards are completely visible. Financial analysis is completely accessible to everybody. And then you're also in a situation where by function, you have a checklist which allows you to implement global best business practices. So you can assess what is happening in your function versus how your blueprint needs to be adjusted so that you can manage your organization in a collaborative function, because you will also be able to see how a decision in one area of the business impacts decisions everywhere else in the business. And I think those are things that we were talking about, that impact small businesses or medium-sized businesses right now, but those are not new problems. They are problems that every business is experiencing, regardless of the size. What you would also be able to do in such a situation is that you'll be able to, especially where you are looking at new markets and growth opportunities and market entry initiatives, you'll be able to, where there's also multiple stores across multiple geographies, you'll be able to create consistency across the operation of the business. You'll be able to manage consistency in terms of messaging within your business. So in terms of onboarding, in terms of making sure that everybody in your organization gets the exact same message and there's nothing distorted, which allows for creating a high performance culture. And I think that is something that, we may have touched on, but we didn't necessarily call out. The managing of culture, especially within the environment that we're operating in, it's far more difficult. Cultures have been distorted by managing the wrong thing. We spoke a little bit about, not being able to build relationships. There's no sense of camaraderie in the current environment that we're operating in. But with the kinds of tools that we have, we can navigate around those challenges. And Colin, you can maybe just jump in here and talk about why, I'm talking about the culture.
Yeah, well, because the culture is so important, because oftentimes what one person is saying, the other person is not hearing, because we have differences in culture. So we're expressing something, we think our meaning is clear, but the way it's received may not be clear, and then it may not be clear to us that it wasn't clear. If you get that that connection. And one of the things I think I would like to highlight about Edvysor, you mentioned it when you were describing the overall features, but I think it's one of the really important things is financial performance and financial management, because too often financial performance and financial management in businesses, especially in mid-sized businesses, is a rear view mirror exercise. At the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, the finance department rolls up all the numbers. We look to see, where the hits and misses were, what the variance was, and then everybody nods their head, because what else can you do? It's done. You're looking in the rearview mirror. You can't change it at that point. And so this is why, again, being able to take the strategies into tactics and then manage it on a day-to-day basis, when you can still make the course correction, so you can still impact the outcome and not operate in the rearview mirror. Well, that without a platform, you can't do that, because you don't have access in a day-to-day, day in, day out basis to the numbers. And too often what ends up happening is we lean too heavily on the finance department to collect all of that and report it to us. And but we need to empower the actual staff and the actual managers to be in more control of that. So one of the things that when I saw Edvysor, it would sort of set off the light bulbs, were shining bright, was how the strategic goals are broken down into detail level, detail individual tactical goals, and then how you can assign the financial metrics to each of those. And then it allows for the people responsible for that to self-report in how that's going, and sure, they're unaudited, unofficial numbers. The finances department will still give you at the end of the day, the controlled numbers, but they're good enough for management course correction. And so the second thing that does is where you're having where you're flagging status of things that are off track. It helps you as a manager understand the importance of that being off track. Because if you don't tie that item back to the financial performance of your business, you don't really know how important it is to react and how important it is to react quickly. So if something's off track, but but it's going to make a 0.01% impact at the end of the month on your financial performance, that's not an emergency. If something's off track and you're going to drop 20% of your profit for the quarter, that needs immediate attention, right? So businesses, especially mid-sized businesses, I find somehow the financial management performance is too disconnected, and it's too much rear view mirror. And I think that's one of the brilliant things you guys did with Edvysor, frankly, is being able to connect the budget allocation and the budget variance and the reporting of the financial elements, the financial connection to the strategic goals, and then be able to see that throughout the organization. So, I mean, you might talk about how that factored into your thought process when you guys put Edvysor together.
So what we saw was that, where transparency and collaboration were crucial in any organization. Sorry, Julie saying, as a former FD, I would totally agree with this, Colin. When it's gone, it's gone. Absolutely, right?
Exactly.
And to your point, right? So the reason why we believed that the goal setting and the clear view of how an organization is operating for everyone in the organization is because, firstly, if you don't know how your role is contributing to the greater organization and to the strategy, you generally have a sense of low employee morale. You cannot manage culture. You want to have an environment where the organization is a learning organization, right? So you're constantly using the data and the information that is available to you to make better decisions. But you cannot do that if you don't have a view of how your organization is performing, where the bottlenecks are, and how you can quickly work around those bottlenecks and get the organization to perform at the rate that you want it to perform at. And there was another thing that was sort of touched on by both Julie and Michael, and it was around inclusion, right? So it's one of the key priorities now, especially within the remote environment. But one of the factors that will contribute to inclusion, from my perspective, is transparency. And Edvysor was not built, as a result of the pandemic. Edvysor was built before the pandemic. What we saw, though, was that it meets the needs of a remote environment. More specifically, when we saw the impact that it was having on consulting businesses, especially our business, you could not be in front of the client all the time. You didn't have to navigate around the challenges of, for instance, waiting on people to send you information. As a consultant, when you are working in an organization, it becomes challenging because your ask for information and your need for a view of what's happening in the operation becomes second to what they're doing in their day-to-day roles, right? But what we found that, and the way we built Edvysor, was that in a remote environment, if you are a consultant working on a client's business, with your client using Edvysor, you actually have full view of the organization and the operation at any given point. So your role as a consultant becomes that much more valuable because what you're doing is you are giving real-time information of what's actually going on in the organization. And remember, we spoke about this last week, sometimes it's difficult to operate where you are working on the business, because depending on your staff complement, depending on your priorities, depending on what you are trying to achieve, you don't always have the capacity to take some time off and start, viewing your business from a higher perspective or from a different lens, is because the work needs to be done. But when you have tools in place to give you a view of your business, to make proactive decisions, and to think about your business differently, like, for instance, being able to have a real-time view of right down to an employee level, what's going on in your business and how they're delivering and what the financial impact of their performance is, you can make better decisions. You make more informed decisions. From the consultant's perspective, the consultant can use it, firstly, to upskill themselves and grow their own businesses, as well as use the same tools to grow their clients' businesses and have a full view of what's happening in the client's business. Now, you don't necessarily need to hire a consultant to use Edvysor. A business can use Edvysor in its totality on its own without a consultant, because you are able to self-diagnose the business. You're able to make decisions about the business based on the operations and the use of the global best business practice. Now, that's where the applied intelligence comes in. It's from the having the information and taking that information and applying it in your business based on your operation and making the two marry, as opposed to taking, throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying that I need to go and redesign my entire operation. It's not the case. That's not what we're asking for. What we're doing is we're giving the tools to make better, more informed decisions based on something that works and something that is an opportunity for you to think about differently, as well as have a view of how your entire business is operating real time. And within that, also manage your employees, manage the morale, keep making sure that your operation is ticking over in the way that it should, through consistent leadership and management practices, through consistent processes, and just complete transparency. So I hope that I've given you a good indication of how businesses can use technology, especially an applied intelligence, to grow, improve, and sustain their businesses. What you can take out from this conversation is that you're not alone. There are people who have been through this and have done the hard yards so that you can make a difference within your own lives and in the environments that you operate in. And I really am grateful for the opportunity to sit here and talk to you about what we offer. So I thank you, to everybody that's made the time to attend, and Julie and Yuka, I'm grateful that you guys have been here the second time round. Same to you, Michael. But I think, I'd like to open it up to the group. Are there any questions? Is there anything that, in particular, you've noticed, your insights, anything that you'd like to know about Edvysor? I am very happy to have conversations outside of this environment too. I'm going to leave my details in the chat so that you can connect with me. My email address and LinkedIn profile. Is there anything that anybody would like to add?
I just want to ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was very interesting what you were saying, and I totally understand and I totally agree with the theory. And my question is, how many companies are using your solution right now? And what's the real use case and what's the outcome?
So we've got a couple of hundred businesses that have been on the Edvysor journey with us.
Mm-hmm.
The BET journey tells a different story. I mean, we've supported over 15,000 businesses globally already, right? And Edvysor was built on BET. In terms of the real use case, it depends on the business. So it depends on what you're going in and you're diagnosing and how much you actually have to do to fix up what you've been alerted to already. If you're asking me about rands and cents, it's very difficult to indicate rands and cents. But what I can tell you is that we've seen very good examples of where businesses are, and it's not theory, it's real stories of where businesses are now operating, where you've got people with clearly defined roles in the organization. You've stopped the bleed of people in the organization. You've stopped the turnover. You're able to manage morale. You're managing onboarding processes. You're managing a clear indication of, goals. Businesses struggle with setting goals and setting a strategy and getting people to implement that strategy. I think it's very difficult for businesses to have a real-time view of what's happening in their operations at any given point on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. And those are things we've been able to implement, making change management extremely easy within an organization, because, and the challenge has not been change management. I have to say that we've seen that people have taken to it because the benefit that they're seeing from the way it impacts their day-to-day lives in the business has far outweighed, the fear of using technology or anything else. What the pandemic has done has also made people far more open to using new tools because it's enabled collaboration, it's enabled transparency, and to be able to stop the bleed of talent in a company is a very big factor to consider.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Yuka?
Yeah. I was just curious how much this was used, and you said the numbers. So it's already in use, and it's already maybe it's interesting to see some case studies.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, actually, I have, that's my question. Do you have an
Indira.
success?
I'm sorry, I did not
did you
get
hear
any
what
of that.
Okay. I'm asking if you have any success story that you can tell that, for example, a company that used your platform and what was the outcome?
So I mentioned it earlier on. I gave you a real life case study of the business and what we found in the beginning where, you don't have any, the business was, predominantly manual. And what we found was that we were able to turn around where you don't have a view of how you're wasting product. You can't get new clients because you can't forecast, you can't bring in new clients because you don't know how to manage your resources accordingly based on the ask of the new clients. We're able to put productivity KPIs in place right down to an employee level, where now every employee knows what's expected of them from a target point of view on every single engagement. So right down to the hour, they know what their productivity targets and KPIs should be. And the organization is now able to resource accordingly based on employees, based on stock, based on, the amount of money needed to keep the business afloat. So I spoke a little bit about it earlier on. I hope that answers your question, Indira.
Yes, thank you. I came a little bit late, so that's why I think I didn't hear that part of the session. Thank you.
But thank you for your question.
Yeah, I did as well. I'm sorry to ask this question, and maybe this probably requires some time. You and I can spend some time together. But you mentioned agents knowing or employees knowing exactly what the goals are. Does your technology interface with other systems that would feed? Because I'm in a call center environment, so like it would feed the performance data into your system, or is it a manual input?
Okay. So for the moment, it's a manual input of key KPIs.
Okay.
But let's have a conversation.
Yeah, we
Because,
should. Okay, go ahead.
I mean, there's lots of opportunity.
Okay, alrighty, because I'm interested in something that really tracks the life cycle of an agent from onboarding to offboarding. to include performance, but also payroll and things of that nature. So yeah, if you upload your information, I'd love to have a discussion because we're interviewing vendors right now, and this
Okay.
sounds interesting. Okay.
I'm going to put the address in, and drop me a note. I've put my email address in the chat. Sorry, and yeah, let's get into contact.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Doug, anything from your end?
Yushini, I think Doug already jumped out for another meeting. So I appreciate your time, appreciate Colin's time, and we're gonna be sending the recording probably next week, together, last week's session and today's. And so for all of you that want to rewatch or watch in full, definitely expect for that coming up. And Yushini, if you have any other materials or information you want to share, feel free to send it over, and I will post it in that follow-up as well.
Thank you so much, Cesar. Thank you. And thank you to everybody for making the time to be here. And Colin, thanks so much for your input and your insights too, hey?
Happy to do it. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Have a good day,
Thanks,
everyone.
Michael. Bye.
Bye-bye.